Hi there, I'm your host Clive Sirkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. Today, as part of my commitment to feature and spotlight really cool, interesting companies, I'm delighted to welcome Chris Ritter, who's the co-founder of Crafty. So Chris, thanks for taking the time. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Well, Clive, you're already being too generous because I'm not interesting and Crafty, the company, is. That's interesting, but speaking specifically about myself, that's it's generous of you to
say it ain't so. But I do think you have an interesting story, and I'm gonna push you on it a bit, in the sense that and I do want to get into Crafty because Crafty is a cool story, and it's like the poster in terms of companies that are got themselves unstuck. Because you started somewhere and you've become something quite different, and you're doing quite great right now. But I'd like to start with Chris the human. So you had a pretty good, childhood. You grew up. You were a soccer player, or can we just agree up front? What are we calling this? Soccer or football?
Let's roll with soccer. There was a funny tweet. Minnesota United beat Everton, who's a team in England. And they beat him 4-0. It was preseason, but they beat him 4-0. And the tweet said, "It's called soccer now." And I found that to be pretty funny.
It's classic. Well, I'm married to a Brit, so I got half of my family are Brits, and we have this debate all the time. Leeds and Newcastle supporters. But anyway, so you bill yourself as a washed-up professional athlete, which I enjoy. But you had a great high school career. You went on to college. You were, as I understand it, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. So, you had a great college career, great high school career, and then you're a hometown recruit to the Chicago Fire. Okay. And you didn't have a long career, but you had a decent, good career, and, you're in a tiny, tiny percentage of people who make it to the pros. Talk about that journey. And I'm interested in two things. Well, frankly, I'm interested in anything you want to say, but I'm really interested in two things. The journey and what it takes in terms of hustle and time and commitment to make it to that level at the pro level. And then and what it was like playing at the pros. And then secondly, we'll get into like what happens when you leave the pros and how you think about that, because that's a big territory. So talk about the journey there.
Yeah, I feel super lucky. I was a good soccer player growing up. I grew up in the Chicagoland area and played for all of the club teams there. I always thought of playing soccer in college as the goal. Of course, if I could be, the starting center midfielder for Arsenal, I'd jump at the chance. But I felt like that was unlikely. And soccer, of course, is a global game, and there are tons of different levels. I was never a national team player growing up. I was a good player. I was recognized as a good player, and I was going to be able to play in college. And I had coaches coming through who always said, use soccer as a tool to get into the best school that you can. And obviously you want to play competitively in college, but it was for a lot of my peers, a lot of people that I knew, really like the end point. And I think that's the case for a few different reasons. This was back in, 2008, 2009. And soccer was growing quickly in the United States. It was growing. The U.S. interest in international soccer was also growing, but the MLS wasn't a league where players were making millions of dollars. And I think for that reason, it wasn't seen as super glam, and it wasn't seen as the most logical step for great college players. Of course, again, like a percentage of college players would go on, but it wasn't necessarily what I, in high school, set my eyes on doing for a career. That being said, if I was a third grader, and looking back, I would say on my third grade self, when you write down, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Professional soccer player was for sure what I'd put down. So I was kind of balancing a few things. One, of course, like a dream of playing soccer. Two, a desire to play in college, and in college at the highest level possible. And then three, just like a true passion for the game. A lot of my friends got tired of playing soccer. They got a bit burned out. That was never the case for me. I really loved it. So I found myself at Northwestern, which was right down the street from where I grew up. Northwestern was a great, or is a great academic institution, but at the time, and they still do, they had a great soccer program. I was initially very against going to Northwestern just based on how close to home it was. I think it was like 3.5 miles from where I grew up. But it was a unbelievable experience. I was able to play soccer at a high level. I was able to engage in the athletic community there. I was able to develop as a person. And I met a lot of non soccer playing friends, people that I still hang with today, people that I've actually started Crafty with. So Northwestern really was an amazing spot for me to go to school and develop as a person. Throughout soccer, throughout school, I was a good player on the team. We won some things. I had some like personal accolades. I really had a fulfilling soccer experience. But freshman, sophomore, even kind of junior year, playing professionally wasn't super on my radar. It wasn't on my radar for the reasons I mentioned. And that I'd say primarily was based on the MLS not being on the level as some of the other professional sports leagues in the US. And then in addition, at Northwestern, there wasn't a clearly defined pathway for student athletes going to and transitioning to the professional ranks. So it's not like there were 10 players ahead of me who had gone to Northwestern and played professionally. There were a few, but none of them really had major MLS careers. So it just wasn't a super defined pathway. That put me in what I would describe as somewhat of an unfortunate position because I was doing well individually and because the team was doing well. I was actually surprised by an opportunity to turn pro. I had grown up playing for the Chicago Fire's academy team, and I had played competitively, with them over the summers. So they knew who I was. And after one of my seasons, I was approached by the head coach to basically turn pro at the time, and they were going to sign me directly through what's called a homegrown deal. At the
Right.
time, I just wasn't ready. I didn't have all of my coursework done. I wasn't ready to graduate. And I was kind of just surprised by the opportunity. I'll also be the first to say I really liked college. College was an amazing time. I had great friends. I was having a lot of fun. Go ahead, Clive.
But and just since you brought it up, it sounds like, and there's the stereotypical view of the college athlete, which is like you're there to play sport to make it to the pros. And the academic side, you do like the bare minimum, sort of mail it in best as you can. But that's a means to an end. It's not. It sounds like you were more balanced in your perspective and actual actions in terms of academics and sport. Is that fair?
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Social.
Yeah, I think it's all about balancing all of them. I think I was a solid student. I was by no means the most academically rigorous student in high school or in college, but I
Right.
did go above and beyond. I went out of my way to engage with students of all types. And I think that was something that was really important to me. Something that I always mention to current student athletes, whether they're at Northwestern or elsewhere, is the fact that, yes, it's great to be a student athlete, but you're at a school that has a ton of other amazing individuals, and you never know how you're going to engage with those people. You never know what you'll be able to do for them or what they'll be able to do for you down the line. And you want to broaden one of the goals of being in college, or one of the things people should take away from being in college, is exposure to a lot of different, type of person, a lot of different academic pursuits, a lot of different potential areas of focus. So I really, really, really doubled down on that. And I think I got out of my shell at Northwestern. I definitely focused on the schoolwork, but I think, Clive, to your point, I was able to be a student athlete, but I was also able to be a normal student in Evanston, and I really valued that.
It's crucial. So, sorry, go ahead.
I'll speed it up. That's all to say I was given really an opportunity to go pro before I was ready, and emphasizing that the pathway wasn't clearly defined. So I felt I wasn't ready for it, and I was almost caught off guard, and I was to some extent intimidated by it. So I ended up graduating college was important, and I would have been able, in hindsight, I would have been able to do so anyway. I wasn't that far off. I just needed a couple more classes, but I ended up saying I'm going to come back for one more year. And now I know that playing professionally is something I can do. it's something I want to do. I just want to make sure I have the house in order. I want to make sure I've graduated. I want to make sure I have that always to fall back on. So I played one more season and then signed the same deal basically after the fact. I signed directly with the Chicago Fire, which was, again, a dream come true. Not only was I able to play professionally, but I was able to play professionally for my hometown team. So that was like the best case scenario. I was really excited to give it a go. I didn't know if I was going to be a starter. I didn't know if I'd ever see the field, but I figured it was worth the chance. So by that time, I had finished up school, and I was really thinking about being a pro soccer player as my first career move.
So, and by the way, I would say it takes probably a lot of guts to say, I'll pass now, let's talk next year. Because I think most kids at what, like 20, 21, something like that, most kids are going to go, holy shit, I'm in, right? So was that intuitive, or you got guidance, or a bit of both?
Yeah, humorously, I actually think it was a mistake. And I think this can be woven into other areas of my life or anyone's life, but
Yeah.
I think I didn't have the right guidance, and I think I didn't evaluate a few key components in the right way. One of the reasons I didn't go then was schoolwork, and that is totally valid. But I didn't recognize the fact that I could have continued living in Evanston, and I could have taken night classes, or I could have, like managed both.
Yep.
And I think I missed on that. And I think a consequence is the sheer reality that playing at the highest level improves your individual ability. And the level in the MLS is different than the level in the NCAA. And therefore, I basically delayed my
A year.
I lost a year. I lost some time because I didn't go sooner, and that's okay. I value the time I had in Evanston. I was able to, have one more semester or whatever it might be of fun, but I think that came at the expense of my soccer playing career. So it's all well and good now. But I think, Clive, to your initial question, I don't know that I made the right decision in hindsight, but it's all about learning from the decisions you made and not making them again if possible.
Oh, you seem to have landed fine. But so you ultimately you make a dream come true in the sense of the current dream. You're playing for the hometown team at a time, and arguably at a really interesting time for MLS. It's starting to become a bigger deal and more of a, let's say, established sport and taking this place. And so, but you have a few years. I forget, it was like 2-3 years.
Yep. A few years of
and
playing.
then time comes, there's a realization that it's not going to be longer. That
I
can
really
be gut-wrenching.
Yeah, I really had the best time playing professional soccer. It was an unbelievable chapter of my life. And when I first started, I didn't know how well it would go. I didn't know if I'd be able to make it. I didn't know if I'd burn out after a year. I didn't know if I'd even like it. But fortunately, when I got into the team and I, was next to players that I had known for a long time, players who had won MLS Cups, players who are really staples in the league, I realized pretty quickly that I could hang with them. I could not only hang with them on the practice field, but I got the sense that I'd be able to hang with them on the actual field, that I'd be able to have an impact for the team. And that was really exciting. I think there is some validation to that. As a professional athlete, you need to have a certain level of confidence. And I wouldn't classify myself as an arrogant person. But I think over the first month or two, I developed a confidence level that I didn't necessarily expect. I think you always have belief in yourself. But once that starts getting validated by teammates, once that starts getting validated by coaches, once that starts getting validated by other players in the league, I felt like I really developed some momentum. So it took me a few months to actually break my way into the team. But when I did, I don't think it came as a surprise to people. And then from there, I felt like I was kind of off. One of my good friends who actually had started at the same year or in the same year as me, Harry Ship, had already been in the team. So he was playing games. He and I would drive to practice every day, and we were close friends. And it was awesome to see the two of us. He was actually a homegrown player too from Chicago. It was awesome to see the two of us starting to get time on the team. And over the course of my first year, I really felt like I belonged. If I had come into the MLS thinking, I don't know if I could do this thing, over the course of the first year, I got this sense that yes, I can. In the background, and as a professional soccer player or professional athlete in general, you have plenty of downtime. So it was always important to me not to just like putz around, to actually have a purpose, to get the most use out of my time that I could. So I had like business interests. I got involved with the Players Association, and was trying to do everything I could to become a more well-rounded individual. But nonetheless, I was focused on the soccer. Being a pro athlete is difficult in a lot of ways. I think it is highly competitive, as everyone would expect, but it's also very difficult psychologically. I know that being difficult from a competitive standpoint and being difficult psychologically are definitely related. But you really are on your own, despite being on a team and despite caring about the overall results of the team. You're also thinking about yourself and how do I play more? How do I have an impact? And I think after year one, I was at the point where I'm like, yes, I can do this thing. It was a tremendous honor, but Harry and I both got invited to play in kind of like their Rising Stars game. So the All-Star game, and then there's like a homegrown game that they called it. So acknowledging a lot of the up-and-coming players throughout the league. I got invited to that my first year, my rookie year, which served as further validation that I belong here. And I would say in closing out year one, I felt like, yes, this is something I want to do. I had dreams of being the captain of the Chicago Fire. So worked hard in the off season, really came into year two feeling good about my level, my performance, the impact I could have on the team. The challenge or a challenge is the market for players from a soccer standpoint is very fluid. And there aren't only players in the US, there are players all throughout the world. And it's the coach's job, it's the general manager's job, it's the owner's job to bring home titles. And for whatever reason, the coach at the time of the Chicago Fire didn't seem to fancy me. And I found coming into year two that the landscape had changed. I was under the impression I had ended year one in great standing, that I was going to be competing for a starting role come year two. But at the start and throughout preseason of my second year, it felt like something was a bit off. The coach had brought in a bunch of other players in my position, and I always use this story. Imagine showing up to work one day, Clive, and your boss has basically put a desk next to you, and it's someone with a very similar name, with a very similar background, and this other individual is going to do the exact same job as you over the course of the day. And after a week, your boss is going to decide who stays and who goes. It really is that cutthroat. And as a professional athlete, you constantly get trialists coming through who are basically trying to take your job. And it really is, again, it's a
double-edged sword, I would imagine, right?
Totally. And this is all to say I found myself really competing, and it's good. Competition is a good thing in pro sports. But I found myself in a position I didn't expect at the start of year one, at the start of year two. Year two is difficult. I felt like the team wasn't doing well. I felt like the individuals playing over me weren't doing well, but I really couldn't get a sniff. And that was difficult on me personally. I felt like I was doing all of the right things. And I think in most aspects of life, or most aspects of work at least, if you're prepared, if you follow instruction, if you show up ready to go, like if you do all of the little things right and you're ready to go come game day, in most workplaces, you have a very high degree or you have a high likelihood of success. In pro sports, you can do all of those things the right way, but when the lights go on, you can play like crap. And I wouldn't
Right.
say that that happened all the time for me, but I found myself frustrated because it seemed like I was putting myself in a position to be successful. It seemed like I was playing well, but it wasn't being received in the right way in the eyes of the coach. So it was a frustrating second year, and a number of things happened. But broadly speaking, I found myself after year two in a position where my future at the Chicago Fire wasn't certain. And it came sooner than I was expecting because I really did after year one and even throughout year two. I felt like I could go on to be the captain of the team, but for some reason that didn't seem to be the case. Like I was kind of
Yeah.
in a in a position that was unforeseen. So that
Right.
created a dynamic where I needed to start thinking about what's next before I was necessarily ready to think about what's next. I knew that I didn't want to play until I was 35, but I definitely wanted to play 5 or 6 years in the league. So I, again, at the end of year two, really found myself in a position where it's like, do I go elsewhere to a different team, or do I start thinking about a career transition? From my point of view, I knew that there was always going to have to be something, and I believed ending my playing career earlier would bake in more career flexibility. I'd control my own destiny versus ending my career at 35 or something and having a family and potentially having fewer options. So there were some advantages to ending and really like moving away from the game earlier. But all of that's to say, I didn't necessarily expect myself to be in that
Huh.
position. I didn't expect to have to make the decisions I had to.
Well, and you read about, and I happen to know firsthand at least two situations where somewhat similar young person comes out of college, makes it to the pros, in as a result of a ridiculous amount of hard work and dream come true to some degree or another, and then it doesn't play out the way you expected because that's the nature of the game, right? In both of the scenarios that I'm personally familiar with, the individual didn't have a plan B, number one. And number two, the trauma, the emotional trauma on multiple levels of it not happening the way they'd wanted to and dreamed of and believed they were capable of, sort of caused them to implode for a short period of time, where it was like, holy shit, so now what? What do I do? Seems like for you, and I'm sure there were emotions involved, but it seems like for you, the transition out of MLS, out of Chicago Fire, and into Crafty, which we'll talk about in a moment, was less traumatic, or are we painting a nice picture in retrospect, or a bit of
No,
both?
it was actually really traumatic. I think it was traumatic for a few reasons. Once I started thinking seriously about transitioning, I um, I felt like the most clear path because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I felt like the
Sorry, and
most
just by the way, your age what at this point? 20?
I was, I think, 25 or 26. Yeah, call it
Okay.
25 probably. I felt like the most clear transition to buy myself time was to go to business school. And I knew that I wanted to be in business in some way, shape, or form. I was highly interested in entrepreneurship, but I felt like business school would be a good landing place. Unfortunately, I was really late in the cycle and I hadn't taken the GMAT yet. It was actually something I planned to do. I just wasn't quite prepared. I didn't expect to have to do it at this point. But business school was a good landing place. It would allow me to come in at a level that wasn't entry level. It would allow me to develop a skill set and it would allow me to buy some time. So for all of those reasons, it seemed like a good transition. And I know plenty of other pro athletes have gone through business school and then come out the other side. So I quickly studied for the GMAT. I quickly took the GMAT and I applied to a program at Northwestern, a JD MBA program, which was a joint law degree and a
Yep.
business degree. That seemed really exciting. I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I felt like there was relevant experience to be gained by going through that JD process. So I was, again, not ready to be done playing soccer, but I felt like that would have been a decent option. At the same time, some of my good friends from Northwestern were starting a company called Crafty. At the time, the company was focused on basically the workplace. There was a clear understanding that companies were investing more and more in the employee experience. So they were building out a company to tackle that opportunity. Two of them had worked in consulting previously and had seen this firsthand. The other one worked at a software company in Chicago. So I found myself kind of with two options. One was, do I want to go the back to school route, or do I want to get real hands-on experience out of the gate? I figured that school would always be there and I could fall back on it. But this group of
Right.
individuals, these three guys, Nate, Ishan, and Jimmy, good friends of mine, I felt like there was something different there. And I was in a position to have an opportunity to become a founder, to really join at the ground floor and try to build something big. I, as I mentioned, always wanted to be closely related or close to entrepreneurship. So it seemed to align with my long-term career desires as well. I went that route. I said, let's give this thing a go. And the transition was extremely difficult. We were not good operators of the business to start, and we did basically food and beverage delivery to corporate offices and
Well,
overall management.
so back up. So now Crafty is launched, four founders, relatively limited experience. In the conceit, as I understand it, at the core of it was delivering beer to companies. I mean, I don't want to underplay it, but talk about the original conceit of the business, because what it started and what I understand it to be now is quite substantially different, although built from the core premise out, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there were a few observations that really Ishan, Nate, and Jimmy made, and then I helped solidify or validate throughout the early stages. But the observations were, as I mentioned, growing investment in the workplace experience. So companies like McKinsey, companies like Deloitte, companies like logistics company number 8 in Chicago were investing more and more in the on-site experience of their employees. Often that meant food and beverage. So that led to a growing market, which for any entrepreneur is a good thing. So we saw a growing market. That was positive. That was benefit number one. Benefit number two was a clear lack of technology in the space, technology investment in the space. On one end of the competitive landscape, you have companies like Aramark, Compass Group, and Sodexo. They would manage concessions at MetLife Stadium. They would manage the cafeteria in Madison, Wisconsin for UW. They also had business units that focused on the office. So they were one end of the market, the classic 1,000-pound gorilla who didn't move quickly. And then on the other end of the market, you had local independent operators for the most part, family-run businesses that generally speaking started in vending and then rolled with the times, but highly fragmented on that side of the market. All throughout, on both ends, there wasn't much client-facing technology, and we felt like there was a ton of room for differentiation there. So that was observation number two. And then the third was recurring revenue. When we looked more closely, we noticed that companies like McKinsey would sign a contract with a provider, and that contract would cover a few years of that provider handling everything related to food and beverage consumable spend. So those three things: growing market, like lack of technology, and then recurring revenue were all positives.
Okay. So it makes sense. I mean, it's a great business model that you're going to bring 2 points of differentiation to a fundamental premise, which is enhancing the workplace experience, emphasis on workplace pre-COVID. Okay.
Yeah,
So who's to know? Who would have known? So now COVID shows up, workplace is gone. Trauma.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's got to be the end of the business, no?
Yeah, I think, and I want to make sure I'm answering the question that you brought up before. Sorry to go back, but related
No,
to
no.
challenges with the transition. So I struggled with the transition because I didn't think I fulfilled my potential, and I wasn't sure that I should be done. I had other
Potential as a player, right?
as a player, yeah, I had other opportunities to keep going, but I chose to stop. And you never want to be the last person at the party, but often you don't want to be the first person to leave either. And I felt like I was leaving earlier than I had to. And I felt like I was leaving with a decent poker hand. Like I had a good hand, and it's not like I was chronically injured. It's not like, I couldn't continue. I was just
Okay. So
opting
that
out.
must mean like, so that must be gnawing away at you.
Yeah. And I think I went through a phase where I wasn't sure I made the right decision. I continued to basically stay in shape for like a year where I would run every day, basically with the same training regimen that you would have as a professional athlete. In the event that I'm like, all right, wrong decision, let's go back to soccer. Like I kept match fit for a really long period of time. And I was in a relationship at the time with someone who kind of thought I should still be playing because that was my dream and I can still do it. I would probably go so far as to say my parents also doubted my decision to move on. So I had a lot of factors that were saying, like, you should still be playing soccer. And as such, I kept myself in shape to be able to play soccer. Um, in addition to that, I found myself in a career I was starting to work and I was doing really grueling, really hands on labor. We were
Right,
building a
because a startup is not very sexy, right?
Totally. And there are different types of sexy. I mean, not only
Yeah.
were we building what we think is an exciting venture backed company, but at the time, we had a fleet of trucks, we had a warehouse, we had like a lot of components, a lot of logistical components to what we were doing. We were bringing goods into offices in downtown Chicago. So I have hilarious memories of 2 months prior being a professional soccer player, being on the field in the stadium in front of people who paid money to come watch. And then, a few months later, I was in a freight elevator in Lower Wacker Drive, driving a truck, or I had driven a truck, a box truck, to a building. I'm in a
Unloading.
freight elevator with a keg of beer or a keg of cold brew. Going up the elevator to basically like service an account. And that was because we had delivery team members who had maybe called off sick that day or whatever it might be. We were soft managers. So I really had gone from something that, not that the MLS is overly glamorous, but I had gone from my
No.
childhood dream playing pro soccer to now being in a very like hands-on operational role. And that was challenging. So if I was doubting the decision before, I think it took a lot of perseverance. It took some true grit to go through this really like difficult phase of Crafty's growth where we were heavily, heavily, heavily involved in the operations. I definitely did not know how to drive a box truck as a professional soccer player, and I learned pretty quickly on the job. So I think the transition, and I talk with players who are working their way out of any sport, but in particular soccer, about some of the things I went through, and it is not easy. Clive, you mentioned some individuals who had a tough time transitioning. I definitely fall in that category.
I mean, my perspective, you've been human, not to be traumatized by it. Because it is glamorous. I mean, you're humble in that sense, but you sit playing on a field with 20,000 plus whatever spectators and you're on TV. That's glamorous. And there, no matter how grounded you are, it's got to be a rush and a buzz. And now you got a keg on your shoulder and you're grinding it up, even with a dream of the potential for what Crafty could be. So, that's why I pushed it, because I think it's important for people. It's easy to paint a nice veneer on the story, and miss some learning in the fact that like this can hurt,
Yeah,
and
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 it's
you and
funny.
it's hard to come out the other side in one piece.
Yeah, I think it takes a certain degree of conviction to go through a transition like that. Again, in referencing what I find to be a humorous story, I was seen by friends, by family members. Like part of my identity was being a professional soccer player. And, next thing I know, I'm driving a truck in the loop of Chicago and I pass one of my friend's dads who's dressed up in a suit and tie. And they're like, wait, is that Chris? Like, I thought he was playing pro soccer, but he's clearly not
Right.
anymore. And my partners and I think, had a sense of pride in what we were doing. And I think that's really, that's required. You need to believe in where you're going and you need to move forward with conviction. And I
Was
would
there, sorry, to that point, I didn't mean to cut, well, I did mean to cut you. Um, to that point, did your partners ever question whether you were fully in and committed, or were they understanding and together with you on this journey, or did you keep it compartmentalized?
No, I think I don't think, and I'll have to, that's a good question. I'll have to ask them. I don't think they doubted the commitment, but I think I came to work every day with a belief that I needed to prove myself. And in some ways, they were taking a chance on me. Two of them had worked at a fancy consulting firm. One had worked at a fast growing software company in Chicago. Like they had skills. I had no skills. I knew how to play soccer and I knew how to like talk shop as it relates to business, but I didn't have the hard skills. So I felt like they had given me a chance. I needed to prove myself. I needed to like validate the fact that I should be a founder of this company. I am going to add value day in and day out. I belong here. And I think they saw my commitment, but I think one of the reasons I was so committed is I had that chip on my shoulder. I believed
Right.
that I needed to show up and I needed to prove my worth. So I think that applies not just to my early days at Crafty. I think that applies to everyone. I would go so
Right.
far as to say at all times, but I definitely had that mindset when I was starting out.
Well, I mean, my experience about my limited experience of being around professional athletes across all kinds of sports is that thing that you talked about, that sort of chip on the shoulder that you constant like. I've spoken to people at the top of their game. I mean, world champion sort of level, and they all have a common thread in the sense that they never feel like they've fully proved the point, and that's what drives them. And not in a sense of like being unhappy or incomplete. It's just this little gene that's in there that says, I have another point to prove. And that's what sort of drives them. And the ability to take that gene and translate it out of the playing field and into the truck or into the office or into the commercial environment is an unbelievable skill set, but not without growing pains. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I think in addition, something that a lot of athletes, high achieving athletes, which I don't fall in that category, but a lot of high achieving athletes have is an understanding of how to learn a skill, how to learn something new. And I came into Crafty with some broad knowledge, but I think the most important characteristic I had was an ability to learn quickly and learn effectively. And I think you
It's fun.
do that.
Yeah, so it's funny. I was talking to a guy who had a trading company, and he said to me, only hires professional athletes, particularly position players. And he said for three reasons: one, they have an incredible work ethic; two, they're wired to take coaching and learn and hone a skill, as you just said; and three, which was interesting to me but obvious after he told me, they have the ability to forget a bad play. Like part of the essence of a pro athlete is you're going to have bad plays. If you let it sit with you, it kills your ability. So you got to sort of forget. You got to have amnesia. And he articulated to me in those three terms, and I was like, that's an insight.
I
I don't know
love
if
that.
that resonates with you.
It really does. I think number three is something I never figured out. And I agree with numbers one and two. You said work rate and basically like coachability or ability to learn. Number three, short memory, is something that I just never cracked the code on. It's something I still think a lot about. I'm one to be overly analytical. If I play a game and I play quite well, I think about what could I have done better? Like where did I go wrong? Oh, that one pass or that one instance where I didn't do this one thing. That weighs heavily on me. Versus other people say, yeah, like whatever on those things. Like I did these 30 things so well. And they're thinking about the positive. I've heard both sides, and I don't think there's a right answer. But I struggled with that short memory piece, and in kind of rewinding a little bit to what I was saying about the challenges I had in that year too. I felt like I was doing everything right, But when I did one thing wrong, it really weighed on me because I felt like I needed to be 10 out of 10 constantly to win approval. Ultimately, the coach picks the team. I felt like I needed to do everything so perfectly in order to find my place in the team. Naturally, you can't. And when I did something wrong, I think I allowed it to have an outsized impact on my overall like psyche or my overall attitude towards play. So I think I'm a work in progress there. I agree with world class athletes and those three things that you mentioned being attributes or characteristics. I think that's probably why I'm currently talking to you as a washed up athlete. I never cracked the code on number three.
Well, I mean, listen, we're all work in progress. It's interesting. I'm a big disciple of growth mindset, fixed mindset, Carol Dweck's book and her thinking. And it was what was striking to me when I first read the book was how she talked about what we would have considered like incredibly well established world class athletes. And she used them as illustrations of people with fixed mindsets. So there's a whole other thing there. But I want to change gears because I want to get to Crafty and give a little air to Crafty. So Crafty gets launched. It's a really interesting proposition, which is take an existing category that's sort of old and tired, that hasn't really innovated, um, and bring some innovation and modernization to it and build a differentiated business. But at the heart of it is the workplace. Now COVID comes along, there is no workplace to speak of. Business must be in shit. So sorry, that's a technical term. So what do you do? What happened? Because you guys must have been like existential crisis on the table.
Yeah, it was a tough time. I would note that the workplace still exists, but the workplace has changed. And that was the big or rolling back the clock to February, March, April of 2020. So many individuals, so many employees adjusted the way they worked based on unforeseen circumstances. So it's not like work ceased to exist. Unfortunately, there were some positions that were impacted for longer than others, but it was really an adjustment to what we previously called the workplace. And the clear reality was more and more people were working from home. And our business pre-COVID had no product. We were not focused on remote workers. Remote workers existed before. That just wasn't part of our value prop. So we had to adjust quickly. Unfortunately, we were in the middle of fundraising. So we were excited about fundraising on the pre-COVID company, and we were having some success there. And that dried up. So our cash position was not amazing. And I would say more significantly, venture investors, which were the groups that we were talking to, or the group that we were talking to, they weren't sure what the future of work looked like. It wasn't clear if people would ever go back to the office. And as a business, we were really in dire straits. We had a big team focused on servicing in-office clients at the time in Chicago, in markets, Chicago in the Bay Area, and soon to be New York. We were launching out there. And we didn't really have a good answer for what we were going to do. And there was a ton of unknown related to when or if people will go back. So we had to make difficult decisions as an employer. We had to let go of some people. We had to adjust the way we were spending money. And I wouldn't say went into hibernation, but we had to put ourselves in defense mode. We had to basically be able to see out the storm for as long as possible. Like a lot of businesses throughout the last 24 months, it was really important to us to come out the other side as a better company, as a more scalable company, as a more differentiated company. We didn't figure out how to do that overnight, but we knew it would be possible. So we had to do a lot of retooling. Down the line, and we have this in place currently, but clearly there's been an increase in the amount of people working either remote or hybrid. And as a company focused on the workplace, we need to have a solution for that. So we have that in the background. We think there's a lot more to do, But the big exciting change that we've made over the last, call it 18 months, is we've changed the way we handle fulfillment. Pre-COVID, we had everything running through Crafty. So we had vertically integrated supply chains. Basically, that's a way of saying we did everything ourselves. In Chicago, we had the warehouse, we had the truck, we had the team of people going into offices to manage the location for clients, to manage the aesthetic. And we owned inventory. We were a capitally intensive business, and we had the same approach in the Bay Area. We had that in place because we thought that was the most defensible fulfillment model. And it also potentially had the best margin profile. Amazon would be the good example here. They do almost everything themselves. They, of course, outsource some transportation, some logistics, but most of it is done by Amazon.
Right.
We had struggled with that structure before, especially as it relates to raising money from VCs, because it was not exactly an asset-light business. For every dollar that we grew, we needed an additional truck. We needed additional inventory. We needed additional people. And it just wasn't, in their eyes, quite as scalable as some other more traditional software businesses. So this was background noise for us. This is something we knew. As COVID was going and we saw our serviceable markets in Chicago and the Bay decrease considerably, the serviceable market decreased because fewer people were going into the office. We needed a way to build back revenue so that we could close our second priced equity round. And you can do so in a few ways. You can build back revenue in a few ways. You can add new products, which we did. I mentioned the remote work product. But for us, a clear opportunity was to get to more geographies. So if Chicago and the Bay were operating at 20%, why don't we just get a bunch more places that are at 20%? Because, as I mentioned, we were in a difficult cash position, we needed a way to expand. And the most logical way to do so was through partners. In all of these markets, there were companies handling fulfillment for client accounts. They would really be seen as competitors of Crafty if we were in those places. But we kind of flipped the script and we started seeing these, what would have been competitors previously, as partners. Fortunately, we had invested heavily in client-facing technology, which was differentiated in the market. And we had also invested in operations technology that these partners could use. And we basically started going to other places and leveraging partnership, bringing them into the partners into our operating system to handle client fulfillment in the way we were doing it in Chicago and the Bay. So this was the big unlock. Suddenly our serviceable market grew because we were in more places. And more importantly, we were now being seen as a platform. Venture investors were intrigued by what we were doing because we were
as opposed to like a heavy capital intensive business.
Exactly. And that really was a major unlock for us in closing this most recent round of financing. We went from being
so you guys, just so that everyone knows, so you closed a 10 million round recently.
Yep. So we grew considerably, both geographically and from a top line standpoint throughout COVID, really starting in 2021, call it. And we closed the round in December of 2021 and announced it earlier this year, a few months back. We brought in amazing investors. The round was led by Tribeca Venture Partners based in New York and had participation from credible and really exciting VC firms like Graycroft and OCA Ventures here in Chicago. So we think we have a great group of investors who have supported us throughout. And more than anything, we're excited about the growth potential. We, as I mentioned, went from basically 2 markets to call it 30 markets. And we don't have the same barrier to entry that we had previously, where we had to actually expand in a capitally intensive way. So we think the wind's at our back. We think the future of work, as our investors like to say, is still being determined, and companies like Crafty can play into that. So we're thinking about our client, which is the workplace team, and how we provide a comprehensive solution for them
wherever they are.
as it relates to managing the in-office side of things, but also as it relates to managing employees who never go into an office. So the value prop, or the opportunity is still there. And now we have the financing to really to go after it.
Right. And just because we gotta wrap, but the profile of, I'm sitting here listening to you to this podcast, I'm going like, am I too big or too small a company? What's the sort of profile of the company that you're servicing? Everything and everything between, or?
Yeah, where we're most differentiated right now, and what we would say is our bread and butter client, would be a company who has offices in multiple markets. And generally speaking, each office has, call it, greater than 25 people. So that's the value of our platform. We're able to consolidate vendors. We're able to be that unified place where all workplace team members, whether you're in Atlanta, Georgia, or Seattle, Washington, where they go to manage the on-site experience. So from a client standpoint, we do best with multiple locations.
Okay. And the company is Crafty. Where to find you is Crafty Delivers. So www.craftydelivers.com. It's a fascinating, incredible story. We're at time now, and we got to wrap, and we could probably talk for another hour and a half. But I think there's sort of two stories. There's the Chris Ritter story, right? Which is managing this trauma of a transition at an early age and landing on your feet. And the other is nothing like an existential crisis to sort of sharpen your perspective on your business. And I've seen companies where they get hit with an existential crisis where they get paralyzed and collapse, as opposed to sort of you pull back, keep calm, as calm as possible, and rethink how to apply your core proposition in a different way. And you guys seem to have successfully done it. So listen, I'll be watching your progress. Obviously, we'll stay connected. I'm curious to see how you guys go and grow and expand. But the momentum is incredible. So, Chris, listen, thank you for making the time. It's an incredible story, and you're an interesting guy, and I think there's a lot of lessons to be taken here. So, thanks, man.
Amazing, Clive. Thanks for having me on. It was great chatting with you.
Always good to have a hometown Chicago boy on the show.
I love it. Thanks, Clive.
Oh, man, thanks so much.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit screendragon.com to see our software in action.